The human potential movement got started in California in the early 1960s, mostly at a place called the Esalen Institute in Big Sur. If you've seen Mad Men, this is the place that Don Draper goes at the end. That retreat in the final episode, the one on the cliffs in California where he's sitting in group therapy and finally breaks down, that's intended to represent Esalen. This has been confirmed by Mad Men creator Matthew Weiner. Hold that thought, because we're going to circle back around to Mad Men. And the way that show ends is actually the cleanest illustration I've ever seen of what I'm trying to describe in this video. So the Esalen Institute was founded in 1962 by Michael Murphy and Richard Price. They were two Stanford graduates who had both studied under the same comparative religion professor. And they were trying to build a place where Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy, and the human body could all be taken seriously in the same room. And a quick note here, because I want to be precise, the human potential movement often gets confused with the hippies, and they're not the same thing. The hippies were the broad youth counterculture, the free love and LSD and Woodstock stuff. They were the cultural body of the moment. The human potential movement was the less sexy intellectual cousin, the older academics, the psychologists, the theologians, the writers sitting around in seminar rooms at a retreat center, trying to build something rigorous about consciousness and human capacity. The hippies faded into adulthood the way that youth movements do. The human potential movement is the part that actually endured, and we just stopped recognizing it because it got rebranded into a wellness industry. That's the story that I want to tell. What Murphy and Price and the people who gathered around them at Esalen were really trying to articulate was something pretty radical for its time. They believe human beings have enormous untapped capacity, far more than what mainstream psychology or organized religion was giving them credit for. And they believed that the entire point of being alive, once your basic needs were handled, was to actually develop that capacity. Educators and social workers and such might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah, that guy, he was there at Esalen. He believed that the purpose of developing your full human potential is not to be more productive or be a better worker or to please God or to please your parents. But it also wasn't seen as a selfish or just individualistic thing. The work and the purpose of the work was to become a fuller, more conscious, more integrated version of yourself. And to do that, not as a private project, but as something that would inevitably ripple outward into how you treated other people and to what you built in the world. I think this is an important detail because it's easy to assume that because these were mostly middle-class and upper-class white men, that they were somehow out of touch. In actuality, they were doing what I would love to see more wealthy white men do, and that is ponder how they can use the free time they have the privilege of enjoying to become the best possible version of themselves and change the world by their example and with their resources. Often this time period is thought of as the New Age movement, and I feel like that's an attempt to downplay its significance and just sort of write it off as like a hippy-dippy woo-woo thing. Nobody really talks about the human potential movement anymore, and it's sort of been lumped in with like crystals and chakras, but what they were saying is actually much closer to a political philosophy than to a wellness trend. They thought human development was the foundation for every other kind of progress, and they were treating it like serious work. So Abraham Maslow was running in these human potential movement circles. He published the Hierarchy of Needs paper back in 1943, but it was at Esalen in the 60s that his work got popularized. There's also a strong argument from indigenous scholars that Maslow drew on Blackfoot teachings without crediting them, and he inverted the original framework, but that's a whole other video. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the physiological needs are at the bottom: food, water, sleep. Above that is safety, shelter, security, then love and belonging. Next, esteem, which is feeling respected and respecting yourself. And at the top, the part that most people skip when they reference it is self-actualization, which Maslow defined very specifically not as success or achievement or status, but as the ongoing process of becoming the most fully developed version of who you actually are. He studied historical figures that he believed had reached this state. And what he found wasn't a list of accomplishments, but a set of qualities. For example, they had strong internal values rather than just inherited ones. They were capable of deep relationships with a few people and felt genuine identification with all of humanity. They weren't motivated by the approval of others. They had a sense of purpose that was theirs. And they tended to direct their resources, their abundance internally, outward into work that mattered to them. And they did it naturally because they had something real to give. So you might be seeing now where I'm about to make this connection into leftist politics. One could argue, and indeed I am, that the entire leftist project, when you strip it down, is about getting more people to the top of Maslow's pyramid. We want people to have housing and healthcare and food security and human dignity, not just so they can survive at the bottom of the pyramid. We want them to be able to move up it. We want them to be able to become the best version of themselves and live their best lives. The whole point of a strong social safety net that we leftists want isn't just to keep people alive, it's to free them from that lower level survival panic that consumes the entire bandwidth of a human life and leaves nothing left over for being a person. Material security is the foundation for self-actualization. That's the whole game. Which means if you're a person who already has the material security, who already has the privilege that people are organizing to give to others, and you're choosing not to self-actualize, you are wasting the privilege that this movement is attempting to grant to everyone else. Imagine if Peter Thiel had self-actualized. Imagine if Elon Musk had. The reason these guys are so destructive isn't just that they're focused too much on themselves, it's that they got rich while skipping the part where you develop actual values, where you figure out what you owe to other humans, where you locate yourself inside of a collective, something bigger than yourself or bigger than your own ambition. And without that inner work, abundance just becomes more ambition. It becomes more empire, more power, more wealth, more influence. The whole point of doing inner work when you have abundance and privilege is so that abundance can overflow outward into care and building things that serve people and a legacy that's not just about you. These folks, they never did the work, and so they hoard their abundance. Of course, government policies and regulatory incentives are the best way to force these guys to do the right thing, but why not both? So what happened to the human potential movement? On paper, nothing. Esalen still exists. Michael Murphy continued to run it for decades. Maslow kept publishing until he died in 1970. So the institutions survived. But the idea, the actual substance of what they were trying to do, didn't survive intact because capitalism is very good at picking up a vocabulary and then stripping it of meaning. The human potential movement said that human beings have untapped capacity and should develop it for their own sake and for the good of the world. Capitalism heard that and said, great, we can sell you that. And over the following decades, what the founders meant by human development, that slow, unprofitable inner work of becoming a more conscious person, got converted into something completely different. Self-actualization, the process of figuring out who you actually are and what your life is for, got replaced over the next few decades with self-optimization, which is the version that we're living in now. Self-optimization is the morning routines, the cold plunges, magnesium, journaling, gratitude lists, listening to Huberman on your walk, Notion system for tracking habits, the 10-minute meditation session before you open up Slack. It's the dopamine fast, the elimination diet, the aura ring. It's wellness culture as a productivity stack. And on the surface, it looks like self-development work, but it's just optimization in the service of capitalism. The whole point of the morning routine is to make you a better worker and allow you to get more done. The point of the meditation app is to lower your stress so you can keep grinding. The point of the supplements is to help you keep doing everything you've been doing for as long as possible. And while none of those goals are inherently bad, it's also true that none of them are asking the self-actualization questions, the one that Maslow was talking about. Like, what do I really believe, separate from what I've been told to believe and what the people around me believe? What are my actual values? What would I refuse to do for money? What kind of person am I trying to become? What do I owe the people in society around me? What is my life actually for? This is my working theory for what happened to all those 2020 activists who have now gone full tradwife and Joe Rogan bro. Instead of doing the challenging abstract work of self-actualization, they have switched over to self-optimization. The trendy focus now is on systems. We have routines, we have therapy speak, we have diagnoses for every personality quirk. We can describe our attachment styles and Enneagram numbers and our trauma responses. But ask us what we truly believe, what we'd actually risk something real for, who we are when no one is watching, and a lot of folks would stall out. They never did that inner work. They did the work that capitalism approves of, which is the work of becoming a more efficient version of whoever they were already, a brain detached from a body and a soul, who runs purely on logical choices and not on intuition or deep inner knowing or connection to all other living beings. It's hard to monetize or manipulate a person with a deep inner knowing. It's also very difficult to sell a deep inner knowing to people. So we get ads for red light masks and protein powder instead. And that's fine for many people because it's a lot easier to drink a green smoothie than to interrogate our inner narratives and ask ourselves what we actually want our lives to mean. When 2020 hit and there was suddenly this enormous external pressure to show up politically, what most white people had available was the optimization toolkit, not the actualization toolkit. They got the systems for activism, the list of books to read, the companies or organizations to donate to, the infographic templates to post on social media, the accountability check-ins. They optimized their allyship the same way they optimized their sleep. And it produced visible output for a while, which is what optimization does. But it was never rooted in anything, because optimization is about results. It doesn't help you understand why you're doing it, or what you would do if you no longer personally benefited from it, or who you are when the cause is no longer trending. You can optimize your life without ever really thinking or feeling, and that seems to suit a lot of folks just fine. So when the pendulum swung back and it stopped feeling good to be an ally, and it always does because real political work is mostly tedious and thankless and annoying, a lot of people quietly redirected the activism energy back into themselves. They went into gut health and menopause remedies and the cold plunge. And from the outside, it looks like hypocrisy, but it's actually consistency. They were always optimizing. The activism was just a phase the optimization was passing through. Which brings us back to Don Draper. The final scene of Mad Men is one of the most analyzed endings in television history. The frame is that Don has hit rock bottom. He has abandoned his life. He has ended up at this retreat on the California coast. He's sat in group therapy. He's listened to a stranger describing feeling invisible inside his own family. He's broken down sobbing while hugging him. We think he's had a real moment of transformation. Then he goes off to meditate, and the camera holds on his face. He smiles, and we cut to the iconic 1971 commercial for Coca-Cola. I'd like to buy the world a Coke. And most people watched that ending and felt something hopeful, like maybe Don had found some peace. Maybe he'd had a breakthrough that became this beautiful piece of advertising art. Critics have spent years arguing about whether that was redemptive or cynical. But look at what's actually happening in that scene. We have Don Draper, a man who has spent his entire adult life being unable to tell the difference between connection and a sales pitch, who walks into the literal birthplace of the human potential movement. He sits inside the most sincere institution capitalism had produced an alternative to, the place specifically built to help people become more than what their jobs and their consumer identities had made them. He has what looks like a real moment. And then immediately, he metabolizes that moment into an advertisement. For Coca-Cola, of all things, the most iconic symbol of American consumerism, just empty sugar calories that no one needs, a commercial for a product that really has nothing to do with international relations or diversity or tolerance. Don Draper took the most sincere experience available to him at Esalen in 1971, and within seconds of having it, he had already converted it into something he could sell and profit from. And that, to me, is a metaphor for what happened to the human potential movement. Dramatized in 90 seconds, the culture absorbed it, turned it into a commercial. Rather than actually self-actualize, he optimized the vibe of self-actualization into an ad campaign. The reason most viewers experience that ending as somewhat hopeful is because most of us have been trained to do the same thing. We take in something real, a meditation, a therapy insight, a moment of clarity that we've had, and within hours, we've converted it into a productivity hack, or a piece of content to post on social media, or a self-improvement project. The Don Draper move is the modern wellness move. It's the modern culture of self-optimization. And that's why the ending of that show still somehow feels good, even though it also feels uncomfortable. It's because he's doing what we do. I have a friend who teaches English part-time at a local center for refugees and immigrants. And she is the clearest example of what self-actualized engagement actually looks like. Because she didn't take that work on out of guilt or because she felt like she should be doing it or she would be judged if she didn't. She took that work on because she had spent years actually getting to know herself. She figured out what her skills are, what kinds of relationships were meaningful to her, what she wanted her days to feel like, what she had to offer that nobody else could offer in quite the same way. Teaching English pays terribly, and she still has her full-time job too, but she gets as much out of that experience as she gives. And to me, that is what it looks like when activism comes from self-actualization instead of self-optimization. There's no ego. It's not performative. Very few people even know she does it because she doesn't post about it on social media. The version of activism where you are constantly checking whether you're doing enough and worried about if you're performing correctly or posting often enough or donating enough money, that version of activism eats people alive. It leads to burnout because shame and obligation are not appropriate fuel resources for doing this work. You have to know what you actually care about and why. And finding that out requires the kind of work that the human potential movement was trying to make more widely available and possible for people before capitalism rerouted everything into productivity hacks instead. So what do we do about it? I don't fully know. But I do know that the answer is not more self-optimization. It's not a better morning routine or a smarter system or a new app. I know it can't be done without that slow inner work of actually getting to know and value yourself. I know it has to include developing a sincere interior life and fine-tuning your sense of curiosity and empathy and critical thinking skills and advocating for positive change from a sense of grounded clarity instead of guilt or shame or peer pressure. The work that actually matters is the work that nobody can sell back to you.